Hey friends, I wanted to cover Chippewas. Chippewa is the first really nice boot company that I ever got into. They were my first access into nicer footwear. It was the first time I could afford or convince myself to afford a Goodyear welted pair of Goodyear welted made in USA boots. And these are my Chippewa service boots. They're extremely they're a special boot. Chippewa has a weird place in the recent history of American made footwear. They don't really exist anymore. The original line, the heritage line, so to speak, has closed, and that makes it an even more interesting topic because these days you can still find Chippewa service boots in dead stock, new condition for relatively very cheap on eBay, Grailed, etc. While they were still going, they were priced a little bit too high. And I think they did a lot of things wrong. Obviously, like I don't actually understand or know any of the internal business components. But I like you can kind of guess just from the outside because they made so many different kinds of boots in their original line. They used so many different leathers, and I think they kind of spread themselves too thin and weren't able to it didn't work clearly, and now Chippewa is just this sad, imported boot company with not much to speak of. They still make their traditional snake boots that I think are like, they're they look like they used to, but for the most part, all their boots just look like your regular construction site, composite toe, just nubuck crazy horse leather boot. And they're all made wherever, anywhere but the U.S. These boots are their original line, made in USA service boots, and I've held on to these, and I love these boots. There's something so simple and classic about this last. It's bulbous, but it's not too bulbous. It screams boot. It whispers boot. It's like a humble, like, hey, I'm a boot. I don't know. I like the all eyelets, even though that's not the most convenient. But they made a lot of different variations. This one that we're going to talk about today has a 360 Goodyear welt construction. Sometimes they would do the 270. Some of them did have eyelets. This is like similar to their leathers, similar to like a Red Wing Briar oil slick leather or whatever that's called. It's essentially a corrected grain, pebbled, heavily oiled leather. It's super thick. I haven't conditioned these in, I don't know, 6 months or a year, but just still lots of pull up. It's just a very, very, very oily, comfortable boot. They also had really beautiful, underrated, custom Vibram outsoles. Like look how cool that is. Really, really unique and special. You can see that's like it's got some cord in there. They had, for the most part, their construction, they just had whatever for the midsole. Here it's a rubber midsole. They always did use a leather welt, which I think is awesome. Thorough good, even their heritage line, like the 1892, whatever that was called, they couldn't say the same. Those were all PVC welts. And Chippewa would always use an interesting leather and have a traditional makeup. They also always use Vibram soles. So it was Vibram outsole, a leather welt in an interesting enough leather, and a traditional design. All that came together to make a very, very, very decent boot. Their boots are not made as well as Red Wings. They're just not. In my opinion, they're more interesting than Red Wings in a way. Certainly now, where it's sort of this, I keep finding new makeups on the internet. Like I've been Chippewa is the first boot I ever got into. I found them at Sierra Trading Company or Post or whatever. And I saw their service boot, made in USA, Goodyear welted, Vibram outsole for $100 or something. And I was like, I'm gonna do it. And that was like a lot of money at the time. Not even a lot of money, but just a lot of money to spend on footwear because I wasn't used to doing that, right? And I was like, I'm gonna spend $100, and I did, and they were awesome. Eventually, I outgrew them. I I became too good for them, and I moved on to Red Wings. Then you move on to Truman, and it's sort of this slippery slope into like, okay, now I'm going to fly to Japan and spend $2,000 on a boot. I've not done that, but but I do. I own Lofgrens, I own Viberg and Wesco, but there's still a place in my heart for Chippewa, especially these boots. Like I will never get rid of these boots. I've toyed with it. I've considered it. I was like, well, I own much nicer boots. I'm not really into 360 Goodyear welt. So certainly for like a service boot design, I think it. I don't know, the way it anchors it isn't really my thing. But these are a perfect boot in some ways. I put these leather laces on. They also, so some of the Chippewas have a leather, kind of a leather topped half sole inside. Actually, this whole thing is leather topped. It's leather with some foam on the bottom. Some of them are just whatever garbage, not garbage, but whatever synthetic removable insole. Like this, these are my wife's boots. She has not worn them, as you can see, because she says that they look like Uggs, but we're going to convince her to eventually. I just want her to like use these in the garden, just beat the hell out of them. But really beautiful boot. They also made a men's version of this boot that I owned briefly, but could not rock. But these have just whatever green, it's just like a foam insole. But look at that leather, beautiful, unlined. This is like an extremely unique boot. Who else is making boots like this in the United States? I mean, Sebago, they probably have something like that. And then I'll give these boots their own video, but these are brand new, dead stock Chippewa boots. Got a different Vibram V-bar sole. Beautiful leather. Now, also, these leathers, like some say, they don't say where they're from. I think they're from Horween, maybe Seidel, or Seidel. This is a great full grain leather. It's a great pull up leather, but you'd wear their boots in and suddenly like there'd be like chipping from the leather in a way that I'm like, was that lasted weird? Was lasted too tight? And something about it is just like, just lower quality. They made so many interesting boots. Obviously they're notorious for their engineer boots. I owned, and I kind of regret selling them. I owned a pair of their waxed flesh. They called it bomber jacket, brown bomber jacket leather, which is a dumb name, but essentially a brown waxed flesh engineer boot. And they didn't have a leather stack heel. They had some fake leather. It wasn't even leather board. I think it was like rubber to look like leather. If I'm not mistaken, the Red Wing engineers, the Klondikes, do something similar with their heel stack. It's like not really leather. It's something weird. But it was a beautiful engineer boot. I sold it because I was like, I really should have just put the money in and rebuilt them. Had them rebuilt from the bottom because the upper was just so beautiful. But that's okay. You can't hold on to all your boots, and it's good to, someone else is enjoying them and kicking the hell out of them. But when I come back to these boots, like these are your classic first boot. It's a brown leather boot. It's a forgiving leather, pebbled grain, oil slick, heavily oiled leather, antique eyelets, all eyelets. There's something about this last and this look when I kind of like don't want to wear this like, I don't know, when I want to kind of underdress a little bit or I don't know, get back to basics. Like this is a boot that reminds me that you don't need much more than just a simple, well-built, decently built, service boot in order to just like really feel good and have, footwear that looks great, that feels great, that you feel good about. You don't need a pair of Vibergs. I believe I got these for $100 on Amazon when there was this era. There's a couple of like, I don't want to say famous, but famous to us eras of Chippewas basically being sold off for a bunch of years. It was at Sierra. I mean, you could find, they also made these beautiful like roofer boots, like monkey boots. They made some really cool, I think they made way too many cool boots. They made boots that are similar to these, to these ladies' boots, but in like a tan rough out, and they made an 8-inch or a 10-inch. They made really beautiful, like shearling lined, kind of like cross-country ski boots, like inspired by vintage cross-country skis. They made their mock toes. Their mock toe last was always a little weird, but they made a beautiful wax flesh mock toe boot. They were called like their field boots or whatever. They also couldn't ever be consistent with names. Their names are always all over the place. One was called the service boot. One was like the field boots were also called like the Shipton boots or something. They were really like all over with their leathers, all over with their names, all over with their designs. The cool thing about that is that means that over the years, there's just random boots that keep showing up. That like I've been paying attention to them for a long time, and I still see boots. Like I still see makeups I've never seen. That right now on eBay, there's a boot kind of similar to this in a brown wax flesh with a Vibram lug sole, like a Montagna sole, and it's so cool. And they're asking like, I think the seller wants $300 for them, which is way too high for a pair of Chippewas, but it is like a really cool boot. Their snake boots are really interesting. Quite intense if you're not, hunting in the desert where there's rattlesnakes. Yeah, so you know, they did something really cool. So how do we put this? Like the thing that their downfall was also what makes them great now, which is they made so many different models with so many different leathers, and they spread themselves so thin. Like they're all over the place, and they're at the end they're being sold through Chewbacca or whatever that website's called, Sierra. A bunch of them ended up on Amazon, like this one. I mean, for a while, you could get a made in USA mock toe boot with a Vibram wedge sole, again, leather welt, a really decent, thick leather upper for like $60. For $60 on Amazon. They're just being sold off. And there might actually be a couple of remnants in like tiny sizes, like a 5.5 men's, So, yeah, again, what made their downfall was I think they made way too many boots, but that's cool now because they keep showing up. They keep popping up. I mean, those pair of that pair of like, you could say color 8, burgundy service boots and a nice leather. Those are, you'll find them on the internet now in brand new condition, never worn, just sat in somebody's closet or sat in the back of the store. You're still finding their boots new, dead stock, and you get them for relatively cheap. And to me, I get a little bit bored of Red Wing, especially in the last few years when they haven't been able to be as varied with their design. There's something really cool about Chippewa. They're the underdog. They're the the American boot company that couldn't really sustain it. They have this great heritage and this great history, but they couldn't quite make it happen. They couldn't do it. But it's just a beautiful boot. The black with the brown is like, that's leaves something to be desired, but the outsole's really cool. This obviously should have matched this, but they're both raw cord. They just did interesting stuff, man. Like I don't really get what they did and how they did it, but beautiful rolled top. Sometimes they would have the actual Chippewa, the Native American on the side, and then they just have the simple stuff. But also their backstays were different. The LL Bean collaboration boot is a totally different backstay. These two are actually quite similar. But anyway, I hope that wasn't too rambly. I hope you enjoyed. Hope that was somewhat informative. But I still think it's worth just keeping an eye out for what Chippewa boots pop up on the market. They make these with a lug sole, the Montagna sole, and those are that's a great just kick around boot. Okay, thanks for watching.